Welcome, everyone, to this webinar. It is a pleasure to have so many of you here, and thank you for making the time to attend. I'm conscious some of you will be watching this as a recording later, but I hope that you will find this presentation useful. A copy of all the PowerPoint slides will be available for you afterwards, and you will also have access to a special Padlet page, which has been prepared so that you can go away and look up more links on different topics related to our young people's lives online, managing their safety and managing their well-being online. So I wanted to start really with the theme of today, which is promoting safety, well-being and resilience for our children and young people. And it's a big thanks to the Gwent Regional Partnership Board and the Gwent Regional Innovation Hub as well, who are supporting this webinar. Think about the digital world. We all have different ideas and concepts around the digital world. So one of the first things I'm going to talk about is helping children make sense of that digital world. So I'm going to take us to my first slide, which really sets the context for this presentation, and that is the digital world is everywhere. And when I work with young people, I often talk to them about the digital world to try and understand what they understand. Because if you think about being safe, one of the first things that's important is understanding the environment. Just like we teach children to cross the road safely, in the same way, we have to think about the internet in a practical way. What do children need to know to understand and be able to assess risk? We know this is important because the digital world is shaping our lives. But for lots of children, particularly primary age children, the internet is still quite abstract because they're accessing it through devices. So one of the first things I talk about is we need to understand children's own perceptions, and then we need to work with them to understand the environment. And so for me, having a technology background, I'm really interested in making sense of this network world that we live in. So part of the internet is a whole series of spider-like global connections, computer networks connected worldwide. And one of the first questions I ask children and young people is, what do you think the internet is? And often they'll say, oh, it's YouTube, or it allows me to connect with friends. And they go to the use of the internet straight away. Whereas what I'm trying to do really is enable them to think about the environment. And the reason for that is, if you imagine getting a child to go to the city for the first time, let's say they're going to London or Cardiff or Edinburgh for the first time, you would go with them as a parent. You would show them the good sides. You would show them, things to look out for. And so children learn through your role modeling, but also their understanding of the environment. So when we talk about the internet, what I want them to know is it is part of the real world. And this is another point I want to raise, because often we have different language when it comes to the internet. I think I meet a lot of adults who will say, oh, the internet is, not the real world. The physical world is the real world and the online is not real. But actually, the online world is the real world too. And the distinction between online and offline is really today disappearing. And so it's important for our children to understand that the digital world is the real world and we access it through devices, but that today, internet world connects us to people globally, content, services, software, connects us to different countries, different laws, different political systems, and allows children to think about how big the internet is, how vast it is. And it makes more sense to them when we think about messages like look after your personal details, because often when you think about a child on a device and we talk about not sharing information, text is important. So when they're in a game, that makes sense. Sometimes on some platforms, that context is often less obvious. So for example, a child may say something really privately on X, formerly Twitter, thinking that only their friends can see that, but actually perhaps they've posted it publicly and they may not know. And so today, these are things that we want to unpack with children to get them to think about that digital space. And this digital space includes things like the dark web as well. And this is where I think A lot of parents sometimes get worried because they feel they don't know enough about um, some of these topics. Essentially, the dark web is also part of the internet. It's not an area of the internet you can stumble on. And the dark web has many legitimate links, as well as links to illegal content and criminal content. And sometimes children who are curious may also search the dark web. And I think this is again where I encourage you as parents to learn more about this. And there are many instances where the dark web is used legitimately. For example, in the case of the Russia-Ukraine war, many people who are afraid of being found out in their own countries may share details online on the dark web because they feel they're more private online. So, knowledge is in many ways power, and this is what we want our children and young people to understand. And so, I have in the Padlet I've prepared for you, there are a couple of really good talks on the dark web just for you to learn a little bit more about that. But essentially, what I'm mapping out here is when we connect to the internet, we're connecting to a world of people, content, and services. And just like we prepare children for the physical world, we need to prepare them for the digital world in the same way. And a lot of children will be very familiar with these words here, things like Roblox or TikTok, things like Snapchat, the fact that there are influencers online, YouTubers, and that's an immersive world. And I think oftentimes when we think about children and young people, we're also thinking of them as consumers and not necessarily as creators. But this digital world is going to be the world that they are going to need to know about and work in one day. And so, as a parent, I encourage you to think about how do we develop children's skills for the long term when one day they're going to be, working and living there. And part of that is empowering them to learn about the opportunities they have for learning and connection online in age appropriate ways. So, to my analogy, the internet is like a global city. And one of the key things about that is that it gives us connection, people, content, services. But just like a global city, maybe the questions we need to think about are things like, are there laws in the city? What are the best sites in the city? What dangers must I avoid? Before I can avoid a danger, I must first of all be able to know what danger is. And so, if we are to prepare our children, one of the things to think about is how do we make sure they can recognize risk, but risk doesn't become harm? And this is a key theme that I'm going to come back to again later in my slides. I want children also to know about the difference between public and private communication, but also to be aware that even with private communication, there is a chance digital data can get out because someone can screenshot it, your phone can get lost. So we want children to think more deeply about how they use digital. And not just children, by the way. I think a lot of this applies to us as adults as well, because it's so easy for us to lose our phones or to share our password, and that can compromise our data. But the other big aspect about the digital world being like a city is we want children to know about the laws online. We want them to know that there are laws and that these laws are there to protect us. We want them to also know where to go when things go wrong. So, reporting abuse is really important. So, again, these are things we'll come back to. So, I want to come now to a little exercise with you. What I've got here is a way for you to input your thoughts around the challenges that children and young people face online. If you could do that now, what do you feel are the challenges that children and young people face online? So you have to go to slido.com and put in the code 14779, and then you should be able to type your answers there. And if you could, type them as short sentences rather than as long sentences. Yeah, peer pressure is a very big one, I think. Not understanding the online environment, absolutely. That's another very big one. Bullying is a big one. Exposure to harmful content, yeah, absolutely. And feeling left out, I think that's another big one. Loss of privacy, addiction, unknown people. Thank you. Yeah. The ability to understand the risks. Yeah, absolutely. Self-control. I think that's also a really big one. And in a way, you're pointing at the sort of things we as parents and carers need to address with our children. And I think, there are lots of things that we can do, and teaching them, developing their self awareness, the ability to self regulate, to make sure they have balanced lives. Yeah, are some of the key things. Bullying, again, I can see it's highlighted because it's a bigger word. That means more of you have said it. Um, Photos shared. Yeah. Sometimes children are sharing photos, maybe not necessarily asking their friends for permission. And sometimes photos of children are shared without their permission as well. So I think that's another thing. We are also aware of the fact that children might be sharing nude images, and I'm going to come to that as something else you need to be aware of. Okay, thank you very much for that. What I'm going to do now is ask you the next question. So I'm going to come back here a moment, and I am going to now ask you what you think are the opportunities, the positives that the internet provides children and young people. So I think it's using the same Slido page. Education, creativity, knowledge, I think. Yeah, great learning resource. Yeah, big ones, connection to family, friends, knowledge, um, creativity. I think the world at their fingertips. And, in many ways, that's what the internet offers. The best of the internet offers is all the potential for learning and connection and skill development. Um, and, that includes the new AI technologies. And I want to talk a little bit about that because it's so important today that we educate young people for the future. And sometimes children know more about some of these platforms, particularly if you have older teens, and we should be sitting with them and learning what they know, and encouraging conversation. I have a friend and colleague who, is not a fan of online games, but she realized that her grandson absolutely loved gaming. And so she decided to make that a conscious choice to sit down and play the games with him. But as soon as she did that, he began to open up about the game. And that's what we want children to do, to be able to talk to us openly about the things they like and the things that bother them online. And so, I encourage you as parents to really engage children on these things, where it's appropriate, on the games that are appropriate. But also, if you're making rules, for children, to help them understand why you have the rules and to help them develop that self-awareness and confidence. And as they get older, you can give them more autonomy. And, ultimately, we are preparing them to live independently. And of course, here I'm talking about children, without additional needs or learning difficulties, just in general. Thank you so much. Yeah, there are so many different things here. I think information gathering, having broader views, getting a sense of responsibility, career opportunities, Absolutely. So many different things. And I'm heartened to see all the positives here. So we know it is challenging because there's quite a lot going on online, and it requires that we are actively involved. So I'm going to come back to my slides now. So this is a full list of all the different potential risks that children can experience online. Things like threat to values, disinformation, misinformation. And by the way, if you're not sure what the difference is between disinformation and misinformation, one of them, misinformation, is when someone shares wrong information or untrue information, but without that negative intent. So they did it innocently. Whereas disinformation is when people purposely put out false information to mislead someone else. And that could be, sometimes because they want you to vote a certain way or to buy a certain product, or to, groom you. And so there's a whole, series of reasons why people spread disinformation. But today, as you have all said, there are body image pressures, there's the fear of influencer culture. Influencer culture can also be positive if children follow good influences. Um, there's also the challenge of ensuring that our children don't get taken in to share nudes, and to share any sort of explicit content, because they may think that they have no choice. Sometimes they are groomed and sometimes they are blackmailed. So, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to focus on behaviors, because what when I meet parents, often what they say to me is, Sangeet, I'm not an expert on TikTok or Snapchat, and therefore I think consequently parents feel they can't guide their children. Often what makes children at risk is actually what they're going to encounter in terms of people's behavior or content online. So that's where we need to focus our efforts to make sure that children understand and recognize when an ask on them is inappropriate or illegal. And I'm going to tell you a story to illustrate that point. We also know the internet is really important for many benefits it offers, as you all have said as well through the Slido. So it is today biggest learning classroom. I often talk about it as the biggest classroom, the biggest business place. And today we want our children to be confident participants in this space. So when we are steering them, it's about working with them to develop positive use of the internet. It's really important because I think when we talk about the internet, more often than not, when I'm working with parents or practitioners like teachers, because of the fear of children getting exploited, they tend to see the internet as a negative space. And understandably, because I think there are lots of challenges, but equally, it is so important we also develop positive use. So, can we teach children how to build websites, to develop a game, to learn how to computer code? These are programs that are easily and often freely available online. So this is where I would encourage you as parents and carers to think about how you can go on that journey of positive internet use with your children. So I want to now come into getting to the heart of how we can protect children through a story. And this is a true story that involved three girls who were on Instagram, and they were having a sleepover. And one of the girls had somebody on her Instagram that she really shouldn't have had, someone who followed her. And everything was perfectly innocent. The three girls were having a nice time on the sleepover, and the one girl was uploading photos and tagging her two friends. Within 24 hours of the sleepover, the three girls received a message, each of them, from this uh, older person, this man. And the message was a threat. If you don't send me a nude, I will come to your home. I know where you live, and I will harm your parents. I say this because we sometimes think that, you know, perpetrators online, particularly in terms of sexual exploitation, we tend to think that they often groom children slowly. Actually, that's not the case. In many cases, it's an outright request for explicit images. And so here, the three girls faced a threat. Now, I asked you to think about your average 11-year-old. Do they all have the confidence to go to mom and dad with that? Given that the minimum age for Instagram is 13, so whether they were, on Instagram with their parents' knowledge, but that aside for a moment, it's more about being judged. And in some cases, young people tell me they don't tell their parents because the parents might take away their phones. So we need to look at this because I want every child to feel confident to come to their parent if someone ever threatens them. In this case, the three girls all chose different responses. The one girl was so afraid that she actually sent a nude. The second girl blocked him. The third girl had my favorite response. She turned on him. She said, "How dare you? You're a pervert. I am going to report you." And she proceeded to tell her parents about him. And the parents contacted the police, and that case was taken forward. So it's really important today that our children have that confidence to talk to us about things that are difficult for them. And that's a key part of what you can do in the home. So creating a supportive home environment where children feel free to talk about anything that troubles them is really key. But the other question I have around this is what could protect children? How could we have prevented any child from ever sending a nude in that situation? And the answer is that we need to think about telling stories. We need to talk to them about relationships and sex. We need to talk to them about healthy relationships. They need to know that no adult will ever ask them for such a thing. And they need to know, as I've said already, that they can come and talk to you about anything. So when I'm working in schools, one of the big things we talk about is to use stories to get children to be able to understand these different risks. Of course, the stories have to be age appropriate. But today, by having access to the internet, they are potentially going to encounter risks. And it's so important that our children are prepared for those risks. Because here's the sentence I often use in all my sessions: risk is not the same as harm. And I first heard my colleague, Professor Sonia Livingston, say that in a lecture many, many years ago, over 10 years ago. And it really landed for me because even though I know that risk and harm are not the same thing, I think it's so easy to think of risk and harm as being one and the same. And so I encourage you to think about what is between risk and harm, because risk is part of life. But harm is when a child or an adult, for that matter, engages with the risk and then, proceeds to adopt that risky behavior and potentially come to harm. Whereas what we want children to do is when they encounter risk, to be resilient, to have the knowledge and confidence to take steps so that risk doesn't become harm. And so that's the first point I want to highlight. And then I think the second point is that as parents and as professionals, we tend to focus on the content or technology as the threat. So what I mean by that is we tend to say, oh, it's Snapchat or it is TikTok. Actually, that the platform plays a role, but it's also because children are encountering something they're not prepared for. And whether that's hate online, threats online, bullying, whether that's grooming. So we need to talk to our children about these different things so that they are confident to challenge, they're confident to actually come to you to be able to handle that risk. And I think that's, one of the key things we want. We want to empower children. And so this is about developing their sense of agency, because long term, that's what's going to protect them. And I know there are many parents who, particularly with young children, are looking at filtering solutions. And that's absolutely appropriate and necessary when children are young. But as children get older, we need to also engage them on these topics by having those conversations with them on healthy relationships, on sex and relationships, on kind behaviors, on our values, how we should act online. These are absolutely key things. And I think in a home, it's a really good idea for you to think about setting out 4 or 5 things you want to talk to children about, and it would cover things like how long they're allowed online, what what they should do if they encounter something that troubles them online, their behavior online, what you expect with them, what they expect of themselves. By consciously doing this, you're setting up, I guess, a sense of responsibility for them so that they know that when they're online, it's not free place for them to just act without any concern for anyone else online. There are many factors that drive behavior. And here, in terms of vulnerability, I want to particularly highlight things like past experience and trauma, but also, if you don't have the ability to assess a risk, that also means that you're more vulnerable. Things like having family and peer support is really important. If a young person doesn't have peer and family support, but they're getting it seemingly from someone online, a person has good intentions, that's great. But if they don't have good intentions, that can be a worry. So many factors drive behavior, and that's one of the things I want to encourage you to think about is not just technology, but why do people do what they do? And if we can get under the skin of that, we can build young people's resilience and prepare them for the things that they may encounter that are not so positive. The UK government in 2018 updated their digital resilience framework. And I've included this here because I think it's quite powerful to understand what do we mean by digital resilience. So here it's been defined as a dynamic personality trait grows through digital activation, through engaging with opportunities and challenges online rather than through avoidance or safety behaviors. I think that's really interesting because here it's talking about the fact that for us to develop resilience, it requires that we may encounter risk. And so it's being prepared for that risk. And so we need children to understand and learn, also to recover from that risk. And I think that's the other important point to note here. And there are many additional factors that come into play when assessing whether someone's risk online or not. And so the things like whether a young person is, feeling isolated, whether they're longing for a sense of belonging or searching for an identity, that could put them at greater risk. So we call those the internal factors. And then, of course, the external factors is the external environment of the internet and the platform they're using. And some people who can target children who may be more vulnerable. Harvard University have got some lovely resources here on building resilience. And I wanted to include this just for you to have a look at when you've got time. But it looks some key points in that resilience requires supportive relationships and opportunities for skill building. It's so important that children develop the skills. And I come back to some research we did 10 years ago across Wales. It was a large landmark study. And I remember encountering a young lad from North Wales who at that time had his own YouTube channel. And he talked about it in such an excited way because he was learning quite a lot by having a YouTube channel, including things like managing negative comments, but also getting feedback on things he had created, connecting with a peer network. And I think oftentimes we tend to think about keeping children safe, but not necessarily giving them opportunities to exercise skills. And I think one way to think about, particularly if you have older teenage children, is can they learn from doing? And that will give them valuable opportunities. So, for example, if you want to learn about positive digital presence, you have to develop a website or take part in an online community. And all these things will teach them the importance of being kind, the importance of their actions and consequences, but the importance of positive reputation online. I also just wanted to include here things to look out for. How would you know if your child was being groomed or your child was being radicalized? So, for example, if you've got a child who's normally glued to their phone, suddenly the child doesn't want to use their phone, or if they're being very secretive about how they're spending their time, if they suddenly have money when previously they didn't, If they're, of course, upset or withdrawn or distressed, there could be, many reasons for that. But equally, things like if they're showing sexualized behavior, language, or an understanding of sex that's not appropriate for their age, if they go missing for periods of time, these are all signs that child could potentially, be getting groomed. In terms of getting radicalized, it could be when they have, an obsessive or angry sense of injustice, if they're spending a lot of time online, taking part in certain groups online, especially if they're expressing hate or extreme views. So these are things to look out for. And I think the NSPCC have got some really good resources on this. Similarly, the UK government website has got a lot more on this as well. So what can protect and empower our children and young people? Talked about a number of things here. One is knowledge and understanding about healthy and unhealthy relationships. In other words, do they know blackmail's not right? Do they know what blackmail is? Do they know how some people might try and trick them into giving information, or how bribery can be used or flattery can be used? We want them to have these life skills. Are they able to deal with peer pressure? Do they have a sense of confidence? Can we help them with developing their confidence, having good friends that they see regularly? We also want our children to understand things like consent, safe touch, boundaries. Again, no one should ever have the ability to exploit children. Recently, as in, I think the last half year, there was a case that came to light of someone who was employed by the police in South Wales who groomed a whole series of girls on Snapchat. And what struck me was how he first got their confidence by pretending to be someone vulnerable himself, someone with mental health issues himself. Once he got that trust, he then started to request pictures. Now, if every child knew that nobody has the right to ask for that, that would protect them. It brings to mind that we really have to have these difficult conversations around things they may encounter online. And I'm a huge believer in using stories because it allows a child to enter and discuss. The other thing I would say is, as parents, it's helping our children develop their sense of confidence and well-being. And a really important part of that is a healthy lifestyle. And by that, I mean good sleep hygiene, having good food, exercise, getting out, and being in nature. All these things are a key part of developing their self-awareness and self-confidence so they can deal with things online and offline. And then finally, we want them to be digitally skilled and literate. We want them to understand how content is delivered to them, the biases in content. We want them to understand fake news, for example. We want them to understand confirmation bias, misinformation, disinformation. We want them to be able to participate online, but do so from a place of knowledge so they can't get scammed or get taken in. And this is increasingly important in an age of AI, as I'm going to discuss shortly. The other themes we've covered so far are things like, healthy relationships, sexual exploitation, bullying. We want children to have the confidence to know they can come and talk to you, but equally, as parents and carers, making sure that they're not doing any of those things themselves. They're not asking for nudes. They're not bullying another. So coming to fake news here, I encourage you to look at the BBC website. It has a huge number of resources on tackling fake news. Really, really good stuff. So on the left is a very old photo at the time when Hillary Clinton was running for president against Donald Trump. And, this photo's emerged. She had stumbled on the front of this building. And, how, because we don't see the context in a photo, how that photo was then used basically to say she was unwell. Well, today, we live at a time when we have what we call deep fake videos. And that's increasingly a concern because it can be used both in the political arena, but it can be used for scams. It can be used to persuade people in an ideological way. And so I'm going to show you a few deepfake videos. So I thought I might show you some. This is quite a good one with Tom Cruise. And then there's a fake Obama one. So let's see if I can get this one up.
I'm here at Harvard University. Just an extraordinary place. Goes back to the 1600s. Always wondered what it would be like to go to a school like this. Pretty nerdy stuff. Serious nerds. But nice.
And so that's an example of a video that we would call a deepfake video because it's been created using AI software. He didn't do that video himself. I'm going to show you another one.
It got me thinking about my full-time employees and their ability to survive on $8 an hour in New York City. And foremost in all of our minds has been the loss and the grief felt by the people of Orlando. Most of us don't get our healthcare through the marketplace. We get it through our job or through Medicare or Medicaid. And what you should know is that thanks to the Affordable Care Act, your coverage is better today than it was before. Women can get free checkups, and you can't get charged more just for being a woman. To give his employees came together to pass a common. There's a bill that would boost America's very, very hard times.
Some progress, at least within the small confines of the legal community. I think it's real important.
Here we go. President Barack Obama, when you giving a speech, make sure you use a lot of pauses.
America's businesses have created 14.5 million new jobs over 75 straight months.
We're developing technology. Every technology can be used in some negative way, and so we all should work towards making sure that it's not going to happen. And even one of the interesting directions is that once you know how to create something, you know how to reverse engineer it. And so you can, and so one could create methods for identifying edited videos versus real videos.
So that video was created over 6 years ago. So just to give you some context, and the technology today has got even more sophisticated. So I wanted to share that with you. But I also now want to talk about some major changes we're seeing in AI. And this is really important because the world is changing in terms of what technology is now available. And some of you will have heard of this already, and some of you may not. So forgive me for talking about it if you already know about it. What I'm going to do is do you a little demonstration of the power of AI. So when we talk about AI, what are we talking about exactly? So artificial intelligence is basically referring to software that has been trained on data. Often that data has been available online, but it also has been trained on user behavior. So for example, if we think about your social media feed, your social media feed is curated by software algorithms that have learned all your likes, what you've clicked on, what you've paused on, which video you've paused on, how long you paused on it, what are the things you search for. And so companies like Meta, Facebook's owner, knows how to actually give you content that may be of interest to you. You also have AI developments in areas like driverless cars. AI is used to make suggestions. So if you're shopping on Amazon, right at the end before you log out, it says, oh, other people who bought what you've just bought also bought this. So AI is used to make suggestions, to also innovate and detect patterns. So for example, in cancer research, the software can detect patterns sometimes more accurately now than doctors can, just because of sheer computing power and the ability to analyze vast amounts of data. So today, this technology is going to disrupt and bring immense good, also produces challenges. So I wanted to show you ChatGPT because some of you may not have seen this before. And ChatGPT was a big disruptor in the sense that up until the end of 2022, a lot of the AI software was sort of behind the wall. It was owned by companies. It was used by companies with us as consumers or us as customers. But OpenAI, this company, released this software called ChatGPT. It's basically a software program that acts like a person that has learned the world's knowledge. And now you can query it, you can ask it questions, It can write letters for you. It can design courses for you. It can write essays for you. It can do all those things. And it's really disrupting a lot of arenas in this way. Can you imagine assessment in schools or colleges or universities if every undergrad knew how to get an essay written using ChatGPT? So these are things we've got to be aware of. And I thought it might be easier if I introduced it to you. I think it's very powerful and can be used for lots of good because it can be used as a tool, provided that we are also aware that this software is not sentient. In other words, it's trained on data, it can generate words, but it doesn't actually understand the words the way a human would. So let me demonstrate it to you. Then I go to ChatGPT. So I've logged in. I've got an account with OpenAI, and I'm going to do a new chat. Okay. So here's the chat window. So let's ask it the question. And let's say, for example, I could say, please, can you design me a home agreement between a parent and a child to help keep primary aged children safe online. So it's just created a family online safety agreement. I mean, it looks a bit, technical, but and maybe this might be more appropriate for someone like a school to give out to parents, but it's just drafted me a whole online safety agreement. Now, equally, it can design some games for me to use with my 10-year-old to build their digital confidence. And here we are, it's designed some games. And the thing about ChatGPT, and I'm only showing you this example, it's just one tiny example of some of the AI software that's now available online for free. And there are paid versions as well as free versions. Is that today, if you understood its power, this allows you to then think about what skills your child will need for that digital future, because I think children today are going to need to know how to use it properly, but also its limitations. So today it can design a course, it can write a letter for you, it can do many things, but is it always accurate? No. And this is where you need to also know the limitations and always check what it's saying. So the free versions of ChatGPT, for example, have been trained on data that I think was to 2021, if I'm not wrong. But there are paid versions that are more current. And of course, one of the limitations of this is that ChatGPT has been trained on data, perhaps things like Wikipedia, things like university websites, news websites. It's used all of that. But all of these sources of information are also not unbiased. So there are biases in the way it might answer questions as well. So I encourage you, if you haven't played with this, haven't tried it out, to have a go and to be aware of it. And there are many tutorials on ChatGPT and similar. So where are the other areas you need to be aware of in terms of AI? Well, today there's software not only text-based, but it can generate images for you as well. And there's a whole bunch of new AI tools. So if you Google this, you will be in for a long explore online. But I definitely encourage you to take the time to get to know these platforms. Okay, so huge positives, but also challenges. And an example of one of the positives that I want to highlight is just this. So the Google engineer who was deaf, I think his department within Google created the software so that in real time he could attend meetings and get a live transcription of the meeting on his computer. Now, I think that is a really positive example of how AI can actually, be used innovatively and inclusively. But AI is going to disrupt and change lots of industries, and hopefully it will help us, get answers to climate change, to poverty, to lots of health challenges as well. But is it foolproof? No, and there are limitations. And of course, we know deep fakes can be created. There could be algorithmic bias. You could have AI videos to disrupt the political process. This year, we have elections in the UK and the US, and we are already seeing lots of videos being created that are fake videos. This is another example here, a model who said her whole appearance was edited with AI to look totally unlike herself. And all these tools are not designed with children in mind. And I think that's a huge challenge. In fact, a lot of the internet is not designed with children in mind. And that's, one of our biggest challenges. So we as adults and parents are having to prepare our children for that digital space. So, and this is just a very quick example again. Weeks ago, I think Sadiq Khan, he reported that an audio clip of him was created to mislead people. So instead of it being a deep fake video, it was actually a cloned AI audio of him that made him look anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. So I want you to be aware that it can be used in all sorts of ways, voice cloning. So AI software is really based on what they call machine learning. It is not human, nor does it know or understand what it's generating. It is not foolproof. And we need the skills to be able to evaluate content online. And we need to use it in ways that can help us. And that's where you and your role as parents and carers have an opportunity to educate your children with this. And this whole field of AI is called generative AI, Gen AI as it's called, and it's because it's generating new data. Like when I asked it to design me games that I could play at home to teach online safety, it created new information based on the knowledge it already had learned from, everywhere. It's generating new information. So we want to make sure our children have a sense of agency and care. So we want to encourage reporting of abuse. So these are a whole series of organizations I've included here for you to be aware of. Everything from scams online, you can report to action fraud, to organizations like the UK Safer Internet Centre. They run a helpline service for parents and professionals. So you need to be aware of that. I want you to be aware of CEOP, they're the police agency. So if your child's ever sent inappropriate sexualized content or messages, you can report it there. And then also the Internet Watch Foundation. Now, they're a charity that do amazing work in the UK. And they actually get child abuse images taken down from the internet, including images where children may have shared themselves. So there's a particular project I want to highlight here, which you may not have heard of, where young people can go and report their own nudes. So the way that the Internet Watch Foundation works is whenever it encounters, whenever they're dealing with reports of non-consensual image sharing for adults, or whether it's nudes that children have shared, or whether it's child abuse images, they create codes, what are known as hash codes of these images, and those are shared in a database with all the big providers like Google and social media companies to prevent those pictures from becoming re-uploaded online. And so the Internet Watch Foundation have actually got a specific project with Childline where young people can report their own nudes if they're worried about an image reappearing online. Maybe they were groomed, maybe they were tricked into giving that picture. And what happens is a code is actually generated, and that will limit it being able to be available online. So, do look into this if you are not aware of it. I am conscious of time, so I want to finish with a couple of key points here. How do they achieve critical thinking, resilience, well-being for children? I think there are two key aspects that we've been talking about, really, and I hope that it's come through. One is education about the digital world. helping young people understand and recognize risks, but equally, they need to be able to take advantage of opportunity. But we also need our children to have a balanced life, to have life skills, understanding of healthy relationship, good values, self-confidence, a sense of agency, related to not just the digital world, but the physical world. And so these are the two aspects that we need to get right. So there are two slides I want to highlight here. We've got to be proactive to be involved in your child's life. Be the parent, but be non-judgmental and create a space where they can come and talk to you about anything. And understand that this is about life skills for the digital age. So in a way, we want them to know about healthy and unhealthy relationships. We want them to know about how to deal with peer pressure, how to deal with bullying. And these are things that are life skills. Now they need it because of life related to the digital space. And here I say, start with the positives of the internet, really important. I think it's so easy to just talk about the negatives. So go on that journey with your child, game with them, learn about the internet with them. And be a good digital role model. I say this because I know that children learn not just from what we say, but actually from how we act ourselves. So role modeling when you are, at meal times, making sure there's time away from devices to have conversations, to do activities with your child, because we know that what children really want is our attention. And this is one of the most precious commodities at the moment. Other key points, risk is not the same as harm. We need to meet them in their experience. We need to understand the context of digital and take that long-term view. As I mentioned earlier, we want young people to be prepared for the digital world and their futures. So that means preparing them through conversation, through involvement, to understand, to develop those skills. So learning how to code, to make websites, participating online, maybe they're setting up an online shop, and encourage them to think about the digital world, not just as a consumer, but as a creator, particularly if you've got older teens. Now, many of you have asked questions, things like, where can I go if I want to learn all about filtering? Some of you have asked things like YouTube Shorts, can we actually limit and ensure that there's not inappropriate content? Absolutely. So there are many, many things you can do and parental controls. And one of the big websites, you'll notice it here, it's Internet Matters. They've got lots of key tutorials and guides for parents that I encourage you to take note of. Also, I wanted to highlight the social media guides from the Welsh Government called on Hub. And there's a guide here on all the key things that children are interested in today, from Call of Duty games to FIFA to things like Fortnite. So if you click on Fortnite, this gives you an example of what's included. So there's actually all the information on the game, the official rating, the risks, how to keep safe on there. And the idea is that parents have the knowledge about all these popular games and platforms. So I encourage you to look at these. And there's lots and lots of guides here. I've made a Padlet page for you, which I'm going to encourage you to look through. It's got links on all the different aspects of young people's lives online, everything from parenting in the digital age to resources that you can use for developing safe internet use with your child, to critical thinking online. So I've put all of those on this Padlet site. And I just want to stop now with a massive thank you for your time. I've got a web link here and a QR code to encourage you to complete this form. And everyone who completes this form will also then get access to the Padlet, just the yellow website I just gave you a brief look at. It has been a pleasure to interact with you. I hope that was useful. And please do take the time to complete the feedback form, as that will be really important for us evaluating this webinar. And thank you for your time. So I am going to bring this webinar to a close and wish you a lovely rest of the day. Thank you very much.